met any number of researchers who want real faculty.
Yeah.
They're second-class citizens.
Yeah.
In the academic system. Oh, not even full researchers.
Yeah.
They're just not real.
We have.
Your mic for live. As of like 1 minute ago.
So,
Dr. Carr, can you introduce yourself?
yes, my name is Steve Carr. I am visiting Atlanta for a month to do some research at Georgia Tech in the area of human evolutionary biology would be one way to describe it. And I have been doing Dokusan with Sensei for about 6 months, I think. And it was, the two things coincided because when I go someplace for an extended stay if possible, I like to sit with the local group if there is a local group. And I called the number, and who should answer but Sensei? So, and that was, so it was a more direct connection. And we talked, we hit it off. I was privileged to help him with his most recent book. And when I was finally able to come down, make the arrangements to come to Georgia, and as I frequently said, in anything that I say, just stick the word COVID in every couple of minutes, and that will explain. Recently, especially, that explains my path. But so I will be here until the 19th on current plans, and then I will be visiting family in California after that. So Sensei asked me to give a wayfinding talk, and I said, how long do you want me to talk? And he said, oh, about 45 or 50 minutes. And I said, I'm not sure that I can talk that long. And he said, oh, yes, you can, because I've heard you. So I begin at the beginning. You probably know the one about the two monks. They're walking along the road and they come to a river, and the bridge is out. And a geisha is there. And the one monk, without saying anything, picks up the geisha, puts her on his back, wades across the river along with his companion, and when they get to the other side, he puts the geisha down, and the two proceed walking. And after a couple of miles, the second monk cannot stand it any longer and says, you know that our precepts prohibit us from touching women, yet you put this woman on your back. How could you possibly do that? First monk says, put her down. I did 2 hours ago. And I think that was the first real Zen that I saw, where it was labeled as Zen. But it takes a while to get there. My family, my father was an artist. We would go to San Francisco. The Young Art Museum, the Shed Aquarium, which I was interested in, and the Japanese Tea Garden were all in the same place. And I loved going to the Japanese Tea Garden because it was so peaceful and it was beautiful. And I would say that I felt an affinity with the Buddha image that was in the temple that they had there. And given the opportunity, I would sit and stare at it for some time. So an appreciation of things Buddhist. I did the usual thing that a lot of us do, which is I went to university. I got my bachelor's degree. I worked in Illinois. I returned to Berkeley for my PhD, which was in genetics. And I think the shove that I would have said was in that direction was that I think like a lot of PhD students, and I've talked to several people that are here, you reach a point where you say, this isn't doing it for me, that all the other people around me are much smarter, that I've only gotten this far because it's not been worth anybody's time to boot me out. And I really have no talent for this, but I've invested so much time in this that I just need to keep going. So I got my PhD, and was at a mental state which I now recognize as depression. The next thing that you do, and so a lot of that was, well, as soon as I turn in the pile of paper, everything will be all right, and it wasn't. So then, well, once I get a good postdoctoral, something that you do for a couple of years after your doctorate, once I get a good one of those, I'll be all right. And I arranged for a really good one. And then I got a call saying, well, actually, we don't have the money because we just did the finances. So I didn't know what I was doing next. For the first time since I had been 18, I didn't know what I was doing next. And I made a couple of phone calls. And I had another offer, and the offer was in Texas, and Texas was not necessarily my first choice of places to go. But I knew the fellow who was offering the position, so I did that. And I got to Texas, and it was every bit as bad as I thought that it would be. So you have to imagine going from the University of California at Berkeley to Texas A&M in College Station, which is actually about 100 miles from the middle of nowhere. And I didn't care for it. Bubba doesn't like it. The good part of that was that I had to stand up for what I thought I believed in. And in Berkeley, it's very easy to be liberal and to espouse proper causes. And at College Station, it wasn't. And that I had to stand up when people said things that were just reprehensible. You don't want to get me started on Texas A&M, as I've said to many people. But there were challenges, and it was a question of being angry, and it was a question of being inappropriately angry by what I would say now. And I had a friend who invited me to do the EST training in Austin in a much larger room than this one, so hotel ballroom classically. And I thought, well, since the other thing isn't working, maybe this would work. And during that, had an experience, realized something rather profound. And to say what that was would be telling, but it changed fundamentally the way that I thought about things. And when I reflected on the nature of teaching and talked to some of the people that I had gone through with this, I realized that the fundamental thing underneath EST was Zen. And in fact, there was a little play on words there, because Zen is to sit and EST is to be. So it was very, very deliberately a three-letter word to cover up the three-letter word that was underneath that. And I dropped over to the library and just started following my nose, as another teacher later on said. Pull this book off, pull that book off. Pulled off the platform search of Weinang. I thought, this is great. Wow, this really happened. And so this is great. And then I was introduced to another friend who actually was a practicing Buddhist, did know how to do Zazen, taught me how to do that. And so we spent, I guess probably one evening a week or once a week, we would sit Zazen together, and we had the incense, and we had her Buddha Rupa, and I think she had an extra zafu. And so I learned how to sit, and I learned how to keep my back up, and I learned to get over thinking of the Buddha as being an idol, that it was, well, this is sort of a revered teacher, and I was used to places having pictures of revered teachers. Happened to go to Austin, and in Austin went to the best bookstore in town. And once again, here's the section on Eastern religion and spirituality and yoga and New Age stuff. And followed my nose again, picked out two books in particular, one by Robert Aitken, who was the Dean of American Zen Masters and ran an outfit in Hawaii, and that was taking the path of Zen. It was a very basic set of instructions on how to do Zen practice, and modified my practice accordingly. And the other one was a book, Dropping Ashes on the Buddha, by Daisan Sunim, who was the head of a Korean school that had been established in Providence, Rhode Island, and had centers all over the world, including one that said there in the back was the Empty Gate Zen Center in Berkeley, California, on Arch Street. And I said, well, Arch Street, that was one block over from where I used to live. How is it that I didn't know about the place? And then on reflection, oh yes, there was a blue house on the next street. And from that blue house, periodically you would hear two pieces of wood walking against each other. Okay, and I didn't think anything about that, but so it was there. So on a trip back to Berkeley, with great nervousness, and I suppose that this is common to a lot of people, not knowing what I was getting myself into, I walked up to the door, knocked on it. The door opened. There was a fellow, Jonathan Bowra. Thank you, Jonathan. Opened the door, and with a beatific smile and in his gray robes, invited me to come in and have tea. And it could have been a lot of other people at that center that could have opened that door, and instead it was Jonathan. And I am forever grateful to Jonathan for being that person. So we sat and had tea. He had the beatific presence that one associates with Zen monks. And after we had our tea and I asked a few questions, he answered a few questions in a very straightforward manner. And he said, I'm going to go chant. Would you like to join me? And I'm a scientist. I don't believe in this suspicious nonsense, and the monkey mind is jumping up and down and saying, what are you getting yourself into? You know, you can't do this, can't do this. And so I said instead, okay. And we went in, and the chants that we did were basically those chants that we did today. Some of them were in Korean, so that I didn't have the opportunity to stop and say, wait, I take exception to what I just said, you know, don't hold it against me. And the other was the Heart Sutra, and my experience during that first exposure to chanting, it was like little, know this, know that, know the other. It was like little bubbles were popping. And I came out of it tremendously refreshed, and tremendously saying that, yes, I have walked in the right house. I have begun a proper practice, and it would seem that I am on the path without knowing that I am on the path when I walked in the door this morning. So that was, I think, a Thursday. And it turned out that there was a 3-day retreat starting on Friday. And it was, okay, I can do that, or I can, Friday's the night I wash my hair. And I won't say that I was shoved into signing the piece of form, but basically I was hemmed in on all sides. And well, here, we can sign you this, you can do this, and you can stay here, and that will all be fine. So I said, okay, in for a penny, in for a pound, I might as well do this. Had the retreat. The first thing that we did was 108 vows, except that I didn't know that we were going to do 108 vows. So I just kept on bowing. And by the end of that first morning, the backs of my legs were completely shot. And I was at that point very much still in the situation of my professional life is not working, or it's not working the way that it was supposed to work. And I thought I had seen something of that hotel room in Austin. And I was trying to integrate that with my day job of being an academic. And I went into my first interview, and we don't talk about such things, but my person there, as we said in the Korean school later, he saw my mind and set me a question. And I said, well, I asked for it, didn't I? And proceeded and did what one does with such questions in our Zen traditions, at least in the Rinzai school, and sat with that. And the next time I came back, I gave him an answer, and we both started laughing. And he said, he said those magic 3 words, the 3 magic words are many different things in many different times. And yes, this is it. This is the path to be on, and now I am firmly on the path, and this is all great. And afterwards, that I came back to Berkeley on professional business, and whenever I did that, I would try to arrange it so that we would get a session. That I went to the Mother Temple. Nobody called it that except some of us. The Mother Temple in Providence, Rhode Island, and I sat a 7-day retreat. The 2 things I took away from, well, I took many things away from that, the ones that remind me. The ones in particular that remind me is Daisansanim, which means great Zen master in Korean. He had been away, he came back, and he was going to open the 7-day session. And the Korean ladies in Providence, and there was a very large Korean community there. So the center there operated more like a traditional monastery, and that the community would bring food, and they would make things. They would bring a sack of rice, and they would request that the monks would offer appropriate chanting for members who were ill, and operated very much in the way that a traditional monastery in Korea operated. And one of the things that we had was this marvelous pumpkin soup. It had Korean spices in it, and it was just absolutely delicious. We had this for the celebration. And on the first day of the retreat, we had that for lunch, and it was really great. And on the second day of the retreat, we had it, and we added a little bit more spices to cover up some of the flavor, and it was good. And the next day we had it, and there were more spices. And yeah, I can eat this. And 2 days after that, I was with the other person who had 10 gallons that were left over of this soup, literally 10 gallons because it was in that kind of a bucket. And we had to haul it out to the compost heap and turn this marvelous pumpkin soup into the compost. And I took a lesson. The other lesson that I took at that time, and I think it's always the case in going to any Zen center where you don't know the people, is that when we first sat down, we were assigned places at random, I assume, and there was just your name, first name, and an initial if it was necessary. This is where you're going to sit. And there was no, I'm Dr. Carr, I do this. I'm Dr. Carr, my job is this, I make this much a year. The way that you usually do these things. And so all you knew about anybody on these retreats was, well, how did they behave during the retreat? And the guy next to me was somebody I had met in New York, and this was his first extended retreat. And so he was up and down like a jumping jack. He could take about 20 minutes in his knees, and then he would stand up, and then he would go back down, and stand up, and go back down, and did that the whole 7 days. And after getting over, you're giving me bad karma, man, then it was poor guy that he wants to sit the whole thing, and he just can't because he's not used to doing this. And one day, somebody else, and not really knowing the names, but somebody else, the two of us were assigned to take the salad from the celebratory feast, and the lettuce was getting a bit wilty. So take this salad, remove the lettuce, and that can be composted. So I'm there thinking that lettuce, but it's stupid. We just got new salad. We don't really need this. We can take the whole thing out to the compost, and I can be doing something useful for the center. And my brother in the salad work leaned over to me and said, when pulling lettuce out of the salad, how should we keep our minds? And I picked up a piece of the salad and I put it in his mouth, and he picked up a piece of the salad and put it in my mouth, and we bowed to each other, and we continued picking lettuce out of the salad in a much more Buddhistic frame of mind. So did a lot of sessions here and there. Had the opportunity to go on sabbatical, which is, for those of you who are not academics, every 7 years, which is where the word sabbatical comes from. The university encourages you to go someplace for a refresher, and it may be to do pure research with somebody new, or it may be to study up on something. And in my case, I had a friend I was wondering where I should go, and I had been to a scientific meeting, and one of the women there I knew, and she was a student of Steve Columbia, who is a very prominent marine biologist, which is related to what I was doing. Mentioned that Steve was in Honolulu, and then I remembered that Robert Aitken was in Honolulu. So I thought this is the perfect match. I went to Steve, who was an old friend. He invited me to come and spend the year, and I wrote to Kokoman, and they said, in fact, we have divided the spaces, and the main practice center is now in Pololo Valley, which is about 3 valleys over from Honolulu. And the old Kokoan Zendo, which I was told, was the first such temple in North America in 1959, and Sensei assures me that the one in Chicago is there in 1954. So we'll continue to disagree on that. But this was the opportunity was there, a room was available, and I thought, this is really great, and I'll be able to be right near the university. I will be able to practice. And I got there, and the question comes up several times. Somebody says that they are in Tibetan school, or I'm in Soto school, or I'm at Rinzai school, or I'm in, what's the one where you just chant the name? The Pure Land, the Pure Land School, and so all of these, and especially with the Soto and the Rinzai, and I've often said that in the Soto you sit facing the wall, and in you sit facing out. And what distinguishes us from other religions is that we've never had a war over that. And Aitken Roshi had, so Roshi means old teacher. So it's, I think that Sensei said the other day that that was like being the PhD at Zen, but it involved transmission, amongst other things, and he was a teacher, and he was old at that point. And the marvelous opportunity there and the realization was that we were in this space which had been the center, perhaps one of the leading centers of Zen in the United States. And that now I had one of the rooms, and people would come through, people that came through to practice for our weekly retreats. They would ask to come over to the house, and then they would ask to come upstairs to my room. And they would say, oh, yes, I can remember being here in the 60s, and there were 20 of us sleeping on the floor in this one room that I had all to myself, and sometimes thought was too crowded. And I began to appreciate the place that this had in Zen Buddhism. I appreciated the space that it had in the lives of people, and people were constantly coming through. Because and some of them extremely well known. One of the Clearys came through. And that was my first experience of working with the Sangha, because it was a very large group. It was attracted by the personality of Robert Aitken. His wife had died not too long before, and there was a great desire to support him at this time. And I came along as one of the newbies, and contrary to my role in academics, it was very easy to say, well, I am at the bottom of this hierarchy, and I will learn from everyone. This is how we do things. And I first realized the real advantages of living in Sangha, because there was a group of 20, 30, 40 people who were the core of this, and that we maintained the temples, that we signed up to take care of the grass, take care of whatever needed taking care of, and you just did it, and you did it without any expectation that somebody was going to say, well, that's really great that you did that, thank you so much for doing that. You did it. Robert Aitken, I found, he lived up to his reputation. He was a profound student of Zen. He manifested Zen every moment. And as if I sometimes thought he is not manifesting Zen, he actually was. And he was showing that you could be angry and still, but if you didn't act on the anger, that there was no problem. So our vows were, it's not that I vow to not become angry, it's that I vow not to indulge in anger. And so it went, and I was able to extend my sabbatical year to basically 3 years. I came back to the university to handle my teaching obligations in one semester. And the chairman at the time was cool with that. And the time that I was actually there, a lot of it was when I didn't have any teaching assignments. So I had a wonderful time, grew to depend on Sangha, found that it was much more difficult when I returned home to maintain a solo practice because it just wasn't the same if somebody wasn't beating the fish drum and wasn't doing the bells, and I could do that with my own. Well, I remember visiting Korea. There's another one of the guys. Visiting Korea for a scientific conference, and I had my mala on, and I think the gentleman's name was Park, and I think that our particular meeting was nominated by Parks. He could have been Leo Kim. I don't remember. Notice my mala asked me if I was a Buddhist, and I said yes, I was. And would I come to him? Would I come with him to was I interested in coming with him to his temple? And I thought that was a very kind invitation, and so I accepted, and we drove about 3 hours into the interior and got to see the other side of Korea, well, many sides of Korea, and got to that temple. It was beautiful. I was the only gaijin at the temple. And the little children would run up to me and they would do a hapsang, and people would see my mala. So I was not just a regular tourist. I would come up and do the hapsang, and I would do the Heart Sutra in Korean with them. So I did it many times that day with various groups of people that were coming along. And the story becomes slightly X-rated here because the little children would come up to me and say, hello, hello, fuck you, hello, hello, fuck you, hello. And they were just the sweetest children, and their faces did not change when they were doing this, but they were using all the English that they knew, and I knew some bad words in Korean, but we didn't use them. How are we doing on time?
Oh,
Okay, yeah. There's plenty of time. Okay. No, it's just when people look at their watch, and you didn't start shaking it, just see if it had stopped. Digital. So there could be an EMP that would stop your watch outside of that, and then we'd have other problems to worry about. But it was marvelous, and it was a full-blown Korean temple with all of the things that you would associate with a Korean temple. There was a huge bell, which was a national treasure, and this was a bell that had been cast, I think, in the very early stages of Zen. And when they struck it, the story was, when they struck it, it didn't have just the right tone, and they consulted a shaman, and the shaman said, it doesn't have the right tone because you haven't, what you need to do is throw a small child. Recast it, throw in a small child, and that will improve the tone. And so now it was accepted. And okay, I'm a guest here. I'm not going to have an opinion on that, and to have the frozen smile, various other things that when you were calling, if you wanted to ask somebody to come over to you, you did it with your hand up, because this would be the way that you would call a dog. I'm sorry, I have it backwards. This is the way that you would call someone over, and this is the way that you would call a dog. And the problem with gesturing to somebody like this to come over to it also looks like stay away or go away. So we had these problems. They had several of the blocks that had been used to do the original Korean translation. So these were 1,400 years old. And I was remarkably moved by the kindness, and that it was, let's put that here, remarkably moved by the kindness that, and afterwards I was in correspondence with the gentleman for a number of years, and we had hoped that there would be a second conference in the series, but there was not. So I got back to Korea. But I returned, and while at the temple, that I had my first interview with Dai Sansanin. And Dai Sansanin said, I am a student of Robert Aitken. He said, when go back Hawaii? And that was the kind of interviews that you had with Dai Sansanin. He had been in the States for decades, and his English was still at that level. And what was characteristic of the Korean school is they were very direct, and that everybody spoke to each other in pidgin is an exaggeration, but a very abbreviated method of talking. And I can remember going into Robert Aitken, Dokusan with Robert Aitken, and for the first time somebody used a polysyllable in Dokusan. I had been thrown off by that. When go back to Hawaii, and tomorrow Roshi, and tomorrow Zen Master, and then he had me come to his quarters and gave me a box of candied ginger, which was medicinal, and this was to give to Roshi. I hadn't known it, but they had known each other a long time. And so all of this is pretty willy-nilly. And when I was reflecting on what I would say, one of the things that I did appreciate about wayfinding is putting one foot in front of the other and getting there. That I got to Illinois when I was an undergraduate by looking at a poster off to my left as I went to a particular building, and I could take you to that hallway and say, here's the poster, and I took the card and got accepted to a program in Illinois. And I walked into the center, and I got into the EST training because I happened to meet a doctor who was selling off equipment, and we got to talking about spirituality, and so she invited me to do this, and I met Nancy because, well, she happened to know this, and so it was just going from here to there, and in biology we call that Markov chain. It's where you go next is the kind of verb there. And unlike my career, well, I could say, well, this is a straight line. Zen is, it's meandering. It's a meandering path. It has many byways. And you take this byway, and there is a beautiful fish pond. And you take this byway, and you hold up your hand with some seed, and a sparrow will come down and take the seed, and you take this path, and you get to go to the Mother Temple and experience the true Zen. How did I get here? As I said at the beginning, it was while wanting to do my science, and the next thing I need to do is this. And there is a Zen center in Atlanta, and it's Soto, so it won't be so rough as it. I can whack my knees out. And called up Sensei, and this has been one of the profound events in my life, and this is 6 months ago, and I'm 68, and so the idea that you can have profound events at any time during your life, and you think, oh, well, that I'm not up for profound events. It's not true. It's not true, and I admire the young people that I did Jukai with 2 weeks ago, and they figured out that there was a better way to do things when they were 15 or 16, and began coming here, and I didn't figure it out until I was well past 30. So we've been on the path of the same. I look forward to doing further work with Sensei. I look forward to coming down to Atlanta. The Atlanta area is lovely. I went out to Andersonville yesterday, and that was profoundly emotional for me as a Civil War student. So all of these things are here. And when that comes to today and being asked, well, taught for 40 or 50 minutes about how you got here. Is there anything else that was in there? I think some of the random little tips were coming in graduate school, coming across the music of John Cage. And John Cage, if you were going to pigeonhole him, you would call him that he composed music at random. He came up with various methods of composing music at random. And he was a student of Zen for a very long time, actually practiced with the original Suzuki, not the Suzuki, not the more recent one. And set a number of the stories, including the one about the two monks, set this to music or set it as a recitation. And going through all of those and met these things just clicking. So little sparks that set off your diamond candle, as Roshi would say. So being alert to those things. That getting a human birth is exceedingly rare in the world. And the fact that somebody else has gotten a human birth is also exceedingly rare. And the fact that we're sitting here, this is not a chance encounter, that this is so extraordinarily unlikely that it must serve some higher purpose in the universe. And so one should not regard these things as just random, but that there is something to be learned, especially if it's someone who has a little bit of insight. Well, I misunderstood that story. And I always thought I knew what was going right. Twirl. You know, that the lotus is being twirled, the Dharma is being passed on. Every day is a good day. And today is a very good day. Every day is a good day. So I will stop there and take any questions that anybody might like to ask.
All right, unfortunately, we can't take questions from online because we didn't have capacity today. So I apologize.
If you have a question that you would like to ask me, you could. I should look that. I should continue looking this way. Okay. Where's the camera? So, okay. So it's not like the FBI that there's something.
Well, it might be.
I know, you wouldn't be able to tell me. If anybody wanted to communicate with me, and especially if anybody is interested in my science, my email is very simple. It's just scarr, S-C-A-R-R, which is also scar with an extra R, all lowercase, at motherunclenephew.ca. And I answer questions all the time. In fact, I'm engaged with a person that I've never met before who has some questions based on my science, which will often get asked a question about Zen.
Questions? Comments? Or not.
Or not? Yeah. I remember, well, I shared it with Sensei, and it's a very old one of Gay and Wilson, who is evidently a Zen student. But the student says to the other one, it is not for us to ask why the master is silent on Sundays. And there's a large cardboard teacher up there, and the Roshi is sleeping behind the altar. that I have, there have been times that I have been discouraged. I have discussed with Sensei, as I have with others, is that it is extraordinarily difficult for me to get my mind to settle. Um, on a single morning like this, it's usually rattling on, and when it does settle on a longer session, that's great. And then I also reflect, as I said with Sensei, well, having had a very profound dry cleaning of my mind, and then I had to drive somebody back to the airport in Honolulu, and I thought, enlightened persons should not be allowed to drive cars. Because everything, that the fact that there's a car coming at me and that there's a car coming beside me, that those are equally important topics. I think I am always encouraged and jealous to meet somebody who is capable of achieving samadhi very quickly. Sensei has given me some new methods that work. And I think I said at one point that how solid is my Zen practice, and that I thought, well, you can have a teacup that is on a little plate, and it looks solid, but if you start to jar the plate, then the teacup may fall off and go to the floor and smash. However, if the teacup is upside down on the plate, it's much more difficult for the teacup. And so many times I thought, well, I turn the teacup over, which is a good thing. Turning over the sake cup means that nobody's going to give you more sake, which is a good thing or a bad thing, depending. And I think also thinking for a good fraction of my practice is that, well, I need to seek out older persons. I need to seek out persons that are well seasoned in the way. And then suddenly you wake up and you're 68 and you say, well, that's no longer my function. My function is I'm a teacher in my day job, and that I can also be a teacher in Zen without wanting to be puffed up about it. But I went through that. And this is with students as well. The students become discouraged that I don't have the talent to learn to do it well. Yes, you do, because what's the answer to this question? So I'm glad
Reminds me of a story I was told by teaching theology and severe spirituality. And he was explaining about the problem with happiness and attachment to anything. And the pumpkin soup reminded me of what he said, the most comfortable seat, chair that you sit in is happiness. The first day you sit in. And the second day it still happens with marginally less so. And a week later it's probably still really comfortable, but it's not happening anymore. And a year later you're dead. And that's pumpkin soup.
And that's pumpkin soup. No, it is the recycling of the birth and death, and pumpkin soup is like that, and we are all like that. My father desired to be cremated, and I have the ashes at home, which I recommend because I can go and talk with my dad whenever I feel like it. But at the time that the interment was done, the minister, who was one of my oldest friends in the world, I've known him since I was 5 years old. We were in the same kindergarten class. The bag had a little tear in it, and it was a windy day, and my father's ashes were being blown across people and were being blown up into the air. And I thought, this is marvelous, because here is rebirth, and that this is going to go, that the calcium will be good for the grass in the cemetery, and that you're going to wash the ashes off when you go home, and that so it will go into the water and it will be dispersed. And then, well, I could calculate how long that would take, but then that would get me into the difficulties that I usually have, and the name that Sensei has given me is Shiryo Beyond Thinking. This is an invitation to not overthink things. It is, in working with Sensei on his book, that a lot of it was about, well, the sections that I was most able to comment on and to quote unquote correct were those dealing with evolution and biology, and how as an evolutionary biologist did I see things. And that it would be pretty easy to demonstrate by modern methods that it is the wind causes the flag to ripple, and that there's lots of measurements that you could take that would demonstrate that that is useful if you had to describe how flags behave. And just reading the other day that it was a very last minute remembrance that for Apollo 11, when it went to the moon, we haven't got an American flag yet. So somebody go out and get an American flag, and then with 1 day to spare, we don't actually have anything so that it will stand out straight. And so somebody got a coat hanger and bent it into the appropriate shape, and so that's on the moon. And it is neither your mind nor the wind which is causing the flag to wave. It's a coat hanger. So the desire to, I take comfort from the Dalai Lama saying that if it were determined that that fundamental belief of Buddhism were not in accord with science in the large sense, then one would have to drop it. And so I was just talking the other day, well, what are the lineages of Zen? And the two that we deal with immediately are Soto and Rinzai. And yes, like coming into a Catholic church or an Anglican church, by looking around, if you know what to look for, you can tell whether this is Anglican or Roman Catholic, except in England where a lot of the Anglican churches were stolen. They're stolen Roman Catholic churches. And we do the same chants, and the chants are slightly different. And I have said again to other people, it is very much like the Christian experience when you go with your boyfriend or girlfriend to their church for the first time. When you get to the Lord's Prayer, there will be a slight hesitation when you find out, well, does this denomination say trespasses or debts? And it is very much like that. It's, and sometimes the difference is can lead to serious matters. I remember in Korea, we would have our bowl, and the person with the oatmeal would put it in the bowl, and then when you didn't want any more, you would move it like this. And so I did this the first time I was in Hawaii. The person kept ladling oatmeal into my bowl. And finally, I had to move it because we were obviously not communicating. And then it was explained to me after here that here we have the bowl. We have the bowl in one hand, and then we have the other hand, and when you've had enough or something, it's like this. And there were a number of little things like this. Like I hold the chant book between my like this between that, and other people don't. And I noticed that sometimes some people look at me, and then they look at other people and say, well, how am I supposed to do it? And of course, that's one of the things about the practice is that you get used to it. And so the first time you go on a retreat, I would suppose, is everything is new and there's ritual and it has to be done properly. And if it's done properly, then this allows you to, well, I don't have to worry about I don't have to worry about smells because there's incense, and I don't have to worry about sight because I'm staring at a wall, and I don't have to worry about sounds because all it is a clack means this bell means that, this bell means the other thing. You get to put all that down and just focus on yourself.
Well, we have these in fact, I think this is one reference that she
Yeah.
just said that
Yes.
website for
I think it's in late May, and I saw that one. And if you know, the reserve plan is that if I don't get all the work done that I need to get done, I could stay longer. However, that has secondary repercussions down with family, seeing my family in California, and then also when I get back to my wife and twin girls and mother-in-law who are in St. John's. And my daughter Matilda has been calling me several times a day, and wants to make sure that I'm okay.
Still,
I ain't seen nobody with an open carry gun, and I haven't seen it. I've been keeping an eye out for it.
Wrong part of town.
I am in the wrong part of town. In fact, I am staying in the Sunset District, and so which is it's south of Georgia Tech. I'm on English Avenue. There was a school that was bombed, and I'm very close to, I think, where Martin Luther King had his church.
The other term is Sundown Sunset County. Historically, I thought you had the sense that you had in certain parts of Georgia.
It is interesting to see it. This is my first trip to Georgia without getting into the politics. That I think the South has improved in these matters considerably. I find it reminiscent of California, and we always thought California was very liberal, but California went through.
When you go east.
When you go east. Well, I grew up in the Central Valley, and I was trained to be fearful of who I was trained to be fearful of. And what I have found is that I have to go away and then come back to get a lot of the visceral stuff out. And that also the transition in California is that the us and them is not there so much. It's there, but it's only as the older of us die off, the younger will not know about it. And I'm seeing this in Atlanta, is that there's no real sense. I do not experience a sense of I worked in Jamaica and I've worked in Washington, D.C., and in those cases, especially in Jamaica, that every moment of the day I'm in the wrong part of town. And so the appropriate thing would be to move out of the wrong part of town, except the whole country is the wrong part of town, and getting over that, and not switching up your shoulders and not having an idiotic chimpanzee grin, and just take people as people. And you do need to pay attention to your senses of what's going on, but frequently those senses are misinforming you. And that would mean it's a very interesting person.
Shall we, thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for putting up with me for so long.
Let's do our closing verses, and then we'll turn off the recording.
I vow to dig and the conditions are inexhaustible. I vow to condemn. Good gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Things are vast. I vow to realize it. Things are numberless. I vow to stay them. Visions are inexhaustible. I vow to obey them. The gates are boundless. I vow to obey. To obey is successful. I vow to realize them. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Visions are inexhaustible. I vow to obey them. The gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it.
Thank you.
Thank you.